Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to a video that I have been excited to make for like a month, but it has not been working out the way I originally intended. This was originally supposed to be a reading vlog where I read some of my friends' favorite books of 2022. I was super excited about all of these books. They were already on my radar or my TBR in one way or another, and I thought the perfect way to tie them together into a reading vlog was, again, centered around my friends who had these books as their number one favorite books of all of 2022. And I was so excited to read them that I started reading them, and I forgot and was too busy to film reading updates as I was reading the books in vlog format. So the next thing I knew, I was on the very last book of the video and I hadn't provided any vlog updates. And I was like, what do I do now? Do I take the next couple of days and pretend to do vlog updates as I change like my clothes and my hair and stuff and kind of fake a vlog? Or do I scrap this video and just include these books in my monthly wrap-ups? But I really wanted these books to have their moment and highlight the friends that inspired me to read them. So we are just gonna do this sit-down style. I will talk through each of the books that I did read in the last several weeks, which of my friends had these books on their favorites of the year lists, and whether I agree with their thoughts and love these books along with them. So hopefully that's okay. I definitely prefer making actual vlog style videos, but this is how this had to work out. I did do an announcement in my previous vlog in case you missed it. I am moving. My husband and I and our two kids, we're moving to a different state about 3 hours away from us. So that is a large factor in why I've had trouble vlogging lately and just making time for videos in general. You will definitely be seeing more moving content from me in the future. Just wanted to introduce it to anyone who didn't see that last video and is wondering why things are so chaotic in my life right now. But now let's get to talking about the books that I read. So the first one that I read is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. This book was the number one favorite of my friend Keisha over at her channel A Book Like You. This book was published in 2021, and right when it was released I did see a lot of buzz about it, but because it is a horror book I wasn't sure if it was going to be my thing, so I held off on picking it up. And I actually was so sure that I wasn't going to pick it up that about a year ago I was hanging out with my friends Gwen and Jessie, also here on BookTube. You will hear more about them later in this video. They were talking about this book together and they were wanting to talk about some spoilers, and I was in the room and I hadn't read it yet, but I was like, yeah, go ahead. Tell me the spoilers, talk about whatever you want, because I'm probably never going to read that book. So they did. I was completely spoiled about the big reveal in this book, and I went on with my life. And then late last year I read Sundial by Katrina Ward, which is her latest release. I was also very wary about that one because it was also described as a weird horror book, which typically isn't my thing, but I ended up really enjoying it. So then I was like, do I go back to this book and read it because I've heard so many great thoughts about it, but I already know the spoiler to the ending. But when I read Sundial, the thing that I was most impressed with was how the ending clicked into place. It was very puzzle piecey and like tick, 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 things just all came together. And I knew that if that was the case in this book as well, I would probably still enjoy it, even though I already knew the big reveal that was coming. So then I saw this on Keisha's list. I heard her talk about it. I have enjoyed other books that Keisha loves and has recommended. Plus, then I was talking to my friend Rachel from Happy Go Lovely Reads about reading this book. She also was spoiled for it. And then we had the idea of reading it together, buddy reading it and talking about it from the lens of already knowing the spoiler. And I found myself reading this book. So very long preamble, but kind of an interesting history going into this book specifically. Like I mentioned, this is a horror book, but it's a very slow horror. And it follows this guy who lives on this house, which is the last house on Needless Street. He lives a very strange and like isolated life, and then somebody moves into the house next door to him and starts kind of looking into his life, and things are revealed about him and his past and whatever. Because I knew what was coming in this book, I think I was more interested in the early part of the book, whereas if you don't know what's happening, it would be very confusing. And it's the weird kind of confusing where like nothing is happening, but you feel like you need to be paying attention to everything. And then at the end of this book, everything does come together. And exactly how I felt about Sundial is how I felt about this book, with the things clicking into place, little reveals happening as the story goes on. And then by the end, closing this book, you have this feeling of like, whoa, that was an impactful story. I'm gonna have to think about that for a long time and like digest it, which I love in books. And I think it was a very enjoyable experience reading this book, knowing what was coming at the ending and being able to use that to analyze the earlier parts of the book as well. I did miss out on the big aha moment, and I actually was wondering as I was reading this book if I didn't know the spoiler, when I would have figured out what was happening, because there are definitely clues throughout the whole book. And I think there are probably a few different points where people could catch on to what's going on, so that when it's formally revealed, it maybe wouldn't be as much of a surprise, but I don't know exactly how that would have played out because I didn't have that experience. It's possible that that could have brought this to a full 5 stars, but I did land on 4 stars for this book. I totally understand why it's so hyped. And now having 2 4-star books by Katrina Ward, I'm so excited to see what she comes out with next. I will be picking up books she writes in the future, even though it's not my typical preferred genre, because her storytelling and the way she just puts everything together at the end is so satisfying. So I definitely see why this was Keisha's favorite of the year and a favorite of a lot of readers in general, and it was a great start to this reading experience. The next book that I picked up is The Lost Girls of Willowbrook by Ellen Marie Wiseman, and this was the favorite book of my friend Lena over at her channel, Lena's Bookshelf. Lena has kind of become the queen of historical fiction, and I also love historical fiction, so I definitely look to Lena for recommendations and trust her thoughts on historical fiction books. And so being that this is a historical fiction as well, I figured I had a really good chance of liking it. And again, it was a book that once I heard her talk about it, it went onto my radar. I knew that I wanted to read it someday, and I couldn't do a video like this reading my friend's favorite books without reading this book because Lena talks so highly and so often about it. This is a book about our main character named Sage, who is a girl who lives in, I don't remember what time period, maybe like the 70s or something. And she had a twin sister, but 6 years ago, from the time this book starts, she was told that her twin sister had died, and so she had been grieving and living without her. And then at the start of this book, she finds out that her sister had not actually died. She was sent to this institution that is pitched as being like a school, but really it's an institution for mentally ill patients. And it's this like live-in care facility where people can basically dump their mentally ill family members and not have to worry about them. So Sage is obviously very disturbed by the fact that she was told her sister was dead when she wasn't. And then once she finds out that her sister was alive and sent to this institution, she also finds out that she is now missing. So Sage decides to go to the institution to try to find her sister, possibly save her from whatever situation she's in, and that's where the book kicks off. This book puts a lot of focus on the institution, which is called Willowbrook, because the conditions at the place were really, really horrible. People were not treated well. They were essentially neglected and left to sit in their own excrements and other horrific things, which it sounds like was inspired by actual Willowbrook, which actually was a real place. And I think that's a big reason why Lena liked this so much, is because she loves learning about institutions like this. I know she is working on or wants to do like an asylum vlog where she reads books all about this type of setting. And in addition to being a historical fiction, it's also kind of a mystery because we're trying to solve the mystery of what happened to Sage's twin sister. I did not hate this book. So Lena, you don't have to turn off, but maybe just like plug your ears a little bit because I didn't love it as much as she does. My main issues with this book are, one, I feel like I've read a very similar book with a very similar premise before, which is not this book's fault, but I know that when that happens to any reader, you just feel a little bit disappointed because it doesn't feel as novel of an idea. That book that I read is called Woman 99, and I included it in a reading blog, so you can go ahead and watch that if you are interested in my thoughts on that book. It does go in different directions, so it doesn't feel exactly like the same book. It just has a very similar initial premise. And then the second issue I had with this book was it felt so repetitive. Once Sage got to the institution, she was trying to find her sister, so she was trying to ask everybody around her for information. The problem was that once she got to the institution, because she was a twin, everyone assumed that she was the sister and that she had come back after running away or whatever happened to her. And so Sage wasn't able to actually tell everybody who she was and get any information because they just thought she was Rosemary and that she was mentally ill and not to be trusted or treated well. And that cycle of her going to somebody, asking for information, them acting like she's the twin sister, her trying to express that she's not the twin sister, she's Sage, she's looking for her twin sister, she's looking for information, and them saying that's exactly what Rosemary used to say, I know that you're Rosemary. And like that back and forth exchange, and then her having to pivot, change tactics, go find someone else to ask. That happened so many times. And on one hand, I get that that might be the intention, because imagine being in that situation. That would be extremely frustrating to have nobody believe you and having no other option but try to find someone else to help you. But as a reader, I feel like I would have gotten the point after 1, 2, maybe 3 times of that same exchange happening, and then realizing that that probably happened with every other person she met as well. I just didn't need to read it 8 to 10 times. But overall, I did enjoy the mystery. There was a like midway reveal or twist that I really enjoyed, and I actually messaged Lena when I was at that point, and I was like, oh, whoa, that changes things. And I do always think that that's fun to have while reading a book. But ultimately, I landed at a 3-star rating. I absolutely will continue to take recommendations from Lena when it comes to historical fiction. I just think I don't have quite as much of a fascination with asylums and institutions as she does, which makes sense because she actually works in that field. So that is a passion of hers that I do not share, but that is not all that exists within the historical fiction genre. So I know that she has plenty of other recs that will probably work for me even more, but I'm sorry, Lena, that this was not a new all-time favorite book for me personally. The next book that I picked up is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, which is a booktube darling. I know that so many people have read this book, so many people have talked about this book, and there are very polarized opinions about this book. This book was published in 2020, and I remember right when it was about to come out, there was so much buzz about it because so many readers love V.E. Schwab, especially fantasy readers. And then once it came out, I remember seeing a lot of disappointed reviews. Again, I think mostly from fantasy readers. And then in the last year or so, I have been seeing more and more glowing reviews because I think this book is starting to find its intended audience. This book was at the top of 2 of my friends' favorite lists in 2022, Kendall from Bookphoria, as well as Kelsey from Essentially Booked. And that's actually pretty interesting because I would classify Kendall as a primarily fantasy reader, but Kelsey I think gravitates more towards realistic fiction, historical fiction, contemporaries, things like that. So pretty interesting that 2 people with kind of different tastes both really love this book. I was very curious to find out how I felt about this book because I've heard it pitched so many times and I've heard so many differing reviews on it. I had a pretty good inkling that I was going to enjoy it because this is a slow burn, character-focused, very light fantasy. This is all about our main character, Addie, who in the year 1714 was arranged to be married to this person that she did not want to be married to. She felt like she was being trapped in her life. So she flew her hometown, was running away and basically praying to the gods, trying to make some kind of deal so that she didn't have to live the life she was stuck in. She wanted to be free, and she ended up making a deal with this like dark god devil type creature who promised her that she was free, she could live forever. But the catch is that everyone she meets will immediately forget her. Once she leaves a room or another person leaves the room, their whole interaction with her was wiped from their memory, so nobody knows who she is. Even her family members forget all about her. Everyone she knew and will ever meet will not remember her, which off the bat is a concept I love the idea of. I love situations like that typically show up more in like dystopian or sci-fi type books. I suppose sometimes in fantasy as well, but this book was not at all focused on like the magic of what's happening and how it was happening, but just making the assumption that it was happening. Now Addie just has to deal with this situation. I love that, having that premise and thinking to myself, what would I do in that situation? I loved learning about Addie struggling to get food on the table sometimes because she can't hold a consistent job, trying to find out where to stay. She couldn't rent an apartment or a hotel because anytime she checked in, as soon as she left, that person forgot their entire interaction and thought she was an intruder in the place she was trying to live. So all of those logistical things I loved reading about, and really it's just about her entire never-ending life in this situation. I can totally see why so many people don't like that, especially fantasy readers who like magic and action and world building and all the things about fantasy books that this book is not. I do not like any of those things. I like interesting situations, interesting characters, and that's what this book gave me. So I am very glad that I read it, and I'm really glad that I enjoyed it as much as I was hoping and expecting to. I ended up giving this 4 stars. It did not quite hit me as much as I think it hits people who give it 5 stars and have it as their all-time favorites. Like, it just didn't quite get there with me emotionally, but I still really fully enjoyed it. Love the idea of it, and I'm really glad that I did give it a try. And I now know what all the hype and unhype is about. And last but not least, the final book that I read for this video is Part of Your World by Addie Jimenez. This was again the favorite book of two booktubers and friends of mine, Gwen from her channel Gwendolyn Kensinger and Jessie from Reading with Jess. They both loved this book, had it on the top of their favorite lists. And on top of them, I have seen literally nothing but raving reviews about this book. I have been continually shocked by how many people I see pick up this book and give it a 5-star rating because it's a romance book, and I know that people's romance tastes vary so much. I feel like everyone has their very specific preferred tropes and things they like included within romance, and even romance characters can relate or turn off people super easily. So I was so curious to read this book and find out if it was really as good as everyone was saying, or what it was that was resonating with so many people within this romance book. This is about our two main characters named Alexis and Daniel, and they come from pretty different lives. Alexis lives in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area, and Daniel lives, I think, down in Iowa or in southern Minnesota. Alexis works for a really major hospital. She is a doctor. Her life is very fast-paced, and she also comes from a very well-renowned family within the medical industry. So she has a lot of pressure on her shoulders to try and uphold that family name and family legacy. Whereas Daniel lives a much slower life. He lives in a small town, and he will stop on the side of the road to help someone with car troubles, which is actually initially how they meet in this book, but they just come from very different worlds, hence the title, Part of Your World, learning to integrate their lifestyles. Off the bat, I loved the setting of this book because I currently live in Iowa. I have lived in the Minneapolis area. That's actually where we're moving back to. So this whole area that this book takes place in, I know really well, and it was really fun seeing it featured in this book. So that was like automatic point number one for this book. Point number two that I loved in this book is that it is not just a light and fluffy romance, which I was very worried about going in because I feel like that's most of the most popular romances are just like the fun ones that are super palatable, almost more like Emily Henry-ish, which I do enjoy Emily Henry as well. But parts of this book I think went even darker and deeper than Emily Henry's books that I've read. This book deals with domestic abuse, so big content warning there if that is a trigger for you. Know that this focuses on that going into it. But I always really appreciate when romance books have something a little bit more substantial underneath them, even if it's not an issue with the main couple, if they have their kind of baggage and situations that they're going through separately, yet have to learn to integrate within their relationship. I love that. So this had that, so I love that as well. Third thing I really liked about this book is that these characters I feel like really perfectly complemented each other. And I think that's kind of a tricky thing to do. I mean, even in a book like this where you're kind of making that the point is that they're so different, yet opposites attract, so they come together. I really think that their differences were written well, and it was the right things within a relationship that worked well together to like calm the other person down or lift them up or whatever needed to happen, which I feel like is a very real life thing that happens in relationships that isn't always written into romance books, because that can be a fine balance. So I know that that was only 3 like important things that I listed, but this book did get 5 stars from me and was my favorite read of this video. It was actually my first 5-star read in all of 2023. So I'm so happy that Gwen and Jessie's favorite book lived up to the hype 100% for me. I don't know if it'll be a favorite of the year for me personally because we are only in February, but definitely a win of a romance book. It will be memorable for me. I will be interested in reading more from Addie Jimenez in the future. I've seen my friends after reading this book diving into more of her backlist, so I will have to keep an eye out for those reviews to see if any of her other books really call to me in their plot and things. But with that, I feel like this was a really successful video. All of these books I definitely overall enjoyed, and I'm really glad that that's the case so that my friends are not mad at me for hating their favorite books. And I don't think it was ever in question whether I would trust these friends' book recommendations or read their favorite books again in the future or something. But having this video go so well definitely solidifies that I should continue doing that. So I definitely will. Please let me know if you have read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what your thoughts were. Do you agree with my thoughts or my friends who had these favorite books? Or if you have not read any of them, let me know what your favorite book of 2022 was. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.